everything else. But I'm really interested in sharing how you looked after 17,000 acres, how you planted trees.
I had some good help.
Well, Jack said they're the best employees in the state of Florida, in fact, anywhere.
Well, some of them were.
And so, how did you get all the acreage in the ground to feed that processing plant? How you handled the unbelievable job of dealing with treating freeze-damaged trees, and we talked about that on the phone the other day. And share a little bit about what offshore labor was and how that functioned and how you were involved in that. Those are some of the things that came to mind with me. So then we'll just kind of go from there. We're just gonna.
And can I get you to say and spell your name for me so I have it on tape?
Dixie Royal, Dixie Royal.
And John does a great job of interviewing. He pretty much puts the words in your mouth. So if you could just repeat the statement back. So if he asks you a question, we don't want, yes, that's exactly how it is. Just kind of repeat it back so we hear you, because even though we'll hear him, we're going to edit him out. So we want to hear it in your words.
Story of my life, editing out. All right. Okay, Dixie, we're talking about Golden Gem, and I'm interested in if you can share with us, first of all, a little bit about the Grove Care department that was there, the people that were involved, how many acres of citrus y'all looked after, and maybe some of the philosophy you had in growing citrus and dealing with growers and so forth.
I guess I'll start with page 4. I have this entitled Working with Golden Gem Grove Care. I started in 1958. And at that time, the Grove Care office and the harvesting department and the packing house and even the main office was up at Altoona. That was way before, or not way before, but before things were built south of town. And the co-op started with Mr. Flippo, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Schreifer, the Nielsen's, and I'm sure Jack knows a few more that were some of the earlier starters, but that were some of the main ones. And it started out as Grand Island Citrus Co-op. And at that time, we just had the packing house up at Altoona. So all of the eliminations went to down to Grover to B&W. I was hired as an assistant production manager under John Kennedy. And there were 3 of us that worked in the Grove Care at that time besides John. And that was Bob Klingbeil, Lot Beard, and myself. Then as Grand Island Citrus grew, we started planting more groves and getting more members. When we started out, it was kind of crude. We'd go in and stake the land out after it was cleared and leveled up, and we used wooden stakes. And then as we did more planting, the shop picked us up a Oliver tractor, and we had a row marker out to the side of it. And basically what it did, it swiveled. In other words, you'd go down the road after we got a straight road, and we had a tire there that would mark it. When he got to the end, he'd switch his row marker over and come back down that. And we had a little scooter plow that was there mounted in the center of the tractor, and it would mark the road. Then we'd do the same thing coming back the other direction. And in so doing, where they met, that's where the tree would go. So.
Now, Bob Klingbeil told me, and that he would be involved with setting up the survey, the transit, and getting things set up to mark the tree spaces, and then a planting crew would come behind and put the trees in the ground. Y'all have a division of labor like that? Is that kind of the?
Well, they didn't have a transit till I got there. And I went up and talked to Mr. Lingerman and spent a few hours with the old gentleman, and he showed me and taught me how to use it. And that's when we started using the transit. And the main reason was you can have one row and another one, and the rows be straight. But when you get to looking down them on the diagonal, they're cattywampus. So after a little bit of military training, I wanted mine to look like soldiers when we got them standing. So we started doing that.
Okay, now did, all these trees that you planted were bare root trees, right?
Yes.
So what was the planting technique? How'd y'all, once you got the tree location in place, what was the next step?
Well, the next step was to dig the holes, and then we brought the trees in from the various nurseries. We brought them from Blanton, we brought them from Ray Kemp, and we bought some from over at Ocklawaha Nurseries from Mr. Connor. And we were planting so many trees there, we just got them from all around. And then we got involved with the Fenders down in Groveland, and they're big nurserymen.
Now,
One time, Chris Blanton was budding over about 1.5 million trees.
yeah, we're gonna talk to Chris and John Kaufman and Ray tomorrow afternoon to find out a little bit about that. Now, with planting all these trees, did you dry plant them, or did you water them in when you planted?
We always mudded them in.
Okay.
And number one was to get the air pockets out of them and to get them watered good, because it might be several days before we could get back and water them. We didn't have anything but water trucks back then.
There's no irrigation, was
No,
there?
none.
How
In fact,
how often do you have to water those trees, Dixie?
according to how dry it was.
Every couple days? at least?
No, if we could get them planted good, they could go a week.
And they were all done with the water trucks, though, so you must have been running water trucks.
Well, when it got dry, we ran water trucks, we ran tractors with tanks, we ran 1.5 ton trucks with tanks on them. We even dumped and cleaned out some of the old fuel tanks that we used for firing, filling up heaters and all. We just watered with everything we could get a hold of. And prayed a lot that it would rain.
Now, as Golden Gem grew, how many acres would you think maximum that y'all were looking after?
A little over 17,000.
And they were all the way from Crescent City to St. Cloud? I mean,
No. They went from above Crescent City, up at Pomona Park, all the way to Fort Pierce. See, we had a lot of the acreage right, close around and then spread out into some in Sumter County and a lot down in Orange County and some over in Seminole County. We had 6 counties here that had groves in them that we had to look after. And then we had 1,000 acres in Fort Pierce.
well, you spent a lot of time in a pickup truck.
That was my life back then.
All right, the dreaded situation would take place, and we'd get a freeze early on. Y'all used grove heaters to fire groves. What was the logistics involved in firing groves on a cold night?
Not very good logistics. You just hoped and guessed, because we didn't have very accurate weather reports until you came into the picture. But before we get to that, let me talk a little bit more about planting trees.
Okay.
Mr. Hoyle Pounds down in Winter Garden was probably one of the most helpful of any one person in agricultural equipment. He came up with a lot of good things. And when we were setting so many trees, we couldn't do them like we used to with just water trucks. Because see, we'd take a water truck and put a 55-gallon drum on the side and put trees in it and set them. That's the way we started. Okay, when we got to setting the big acreage and setting them fast, we didn't have enough water trucks and stuff to do that. So what we did, we marked the rows off and had them checked everywhere the tree would go. Mr. Pounds came up by using a case tractor of all means.
Of course.
And it was a high crop tractor, and he had what he called a hole digger on it. And it was an auger that went into the ground, and then on the side it had 2 discs that turned, and they made you water ring. So I mean, that saved us a whale of a lot of labor. And we would get the property laid off and get the holes dug, and then we'd bring the setting crew in. Well, by then we had mechanized enough that we'd take a hand spray rig, and the shop fixed us up some pipes that were gone on them that came out to each side. And we'd have the hose wrapped on those pipes, and we'd take 4 rows at a time. And we took a Hardy gun, and you know, the old single nozzle gun, and they would use it to mud the trees in, and then they'd stand up and pack it in. And by doing that and having a good, efficient crew, we could set 40 acres a day. And we did that for a long, long time.
4 rows at a time.
4 rows at a time.
4 rows at a time. And most all this acreage was planted out east of Eustis.
A lot of it
in
was,
in
yes.
that area out there. And this big planting effort was initiated to feed this plant that Mr. Floyd and Jack built in town, right?
Potentially to raise more oranges, yes.
Because y'all now moved from just a packing facility to now a packing and processing facility, and the demand was great to get juice oranges to run that facility.
Well, Jack didn't well tell you, but we got a monster down there. It took a lot to feed that thing. At one time, we were running 180 semi-truckloads through the plant a day. That was for the concentrate, not the packing house.
I don't think people understand the size of that operation, what was involved, and just the logistics and getting food in and everything else. It was just phenomenal. You got anything else on harvesting in your notes?
Well, not a whole lot on harvesting, because I didn't work with them much until after the
I
freeze.
mean, not harvesting, on planting. I'm sorry, I got off the wrong thing. Anything else we want to cover on planting? I'm going to talk about cold protection next.
No, we can go on to that.
Okay. All right. So it's going to be a freeze tonight. What happened at Golden Gym?
Well, to get labor, we used a lot of high school kids, and sometimes we'd have as many as 125 kids down there to go light heaters. And we had them scattered all over the place, and some of them were warmer and some of them were colder. And when it got colder, or just a little frosty morning, we had to fire up at Pittman. That grove of Dimmers got fired more than any grove in the country, more so than up in Crescent City. But we'd have the crew foreman and the trucks and everything all gassed up, and the flambeaus that we were using to light the heaters with all ready. And they would come and wait, and we'd watch for weather reports and stuff. And if it looked like it was going to be cold for any length of time, believe it or not, fuel was so cheap there for a while that a lot of the growers would have us fired just to try to save juice. And then later on, because we were buying fuel about somewhere 16 cents a gallon back then. Now, then we got to using a cheaper fuel than that. We used that old Bunker C, which is nasty old stuff.
Now, I guess one thing that really helped you out was that the Lake County School Board would give those boys that fired the grove an excused absence the next day, right?
Because lots of times they wouldn't be in till after daylight, and then our normal crews were the ones that had to fall back in and fill them up in case we had a back-to-back, and that was what was terrible. Sometimes we'd have 2 or 3 cold nights together, and burning them and burning the fuel completely out of them, and then having to go back and fuel them up was terrible.
Well, I know that one night, doesn't make a difference when it was, but I believe that National Geographic was there at your office to document all of this, and there was actually a couple of pictures in National Geographic magazine to document what happened on a cold night. I guess you were the person that told me that there was one of your guys that was running a crew, and he said, "Mr. Dixie, how come you picked the coldest nights of the year for us to go out and have to fire these groves?" An astute observation. So, if you were successful, then you had to worry about getting the heaters refueled and going for a second night and everything else. But if you weren't successful, if it got too cold and everything else, I guess in '62, was probably the first year you started doing a lot of pruning after the freezes.
Well, we did some in places after 57,
Okay.
but 62 was bigger. Like I tell a lot of people, I've lived too long. I've been through 5 once in a lifetime freezes.
That's right. Well, when the freezes of the '80s came along, Dixie, which you had to deal with the aftermath of the freezes. tell me a little bit about how you handle pruning, brush removal, taking care of all these groves that were heavily damaged by the cold.
Well, nobody had ever experienced this before. And you can't believe the growers, they wanted theirs pruned first. And we just couldn't prune everybody's first because we had too many to do. So we got up all of the crews that we could. And most of them were picking crews. And after, they salvaged what fruit that they could, there wasn't anything for them to do, so there were plenty of them looking for work. And a lot of them never ran chainsaws before, and that scared the daylights out of me. So what we do, we furnished a lot of them chainsaws, and we'd have a schooling, and sometimes I had to have an interpreter to have a school because they couldn't understand what you were saying. So we'd have a schooling on safety of chainsaws before they ever went out. And fortunately, we only had one bad accident out of about 400 people pruning.
Okay, so you had 400 people pruning. They were putting brush on the ground. And how many front-end loaders did you have running at one time?
24. And then we had several tractors fixed up with, brush rakes on the front of them, but I had 24 bulldozers going. And I would have had more if I could have gotten them.
So you're pruning, you're bulldozing, you're burning. And you probably, during that time period, you were out of the house at 5 in the morning. You probably weren't back until midnight many a time. And I don't think people really understood what a monumental job it was to get all those trees pruned, the brush stacked up and everything burned. Just I guess your training in the Air Force allowed you to do all the logistical work with all this stuff.
Well, it helped for sure.
So post-freeze, things obviously were a whole lot different. Acreage dropped off, and you had to go through all the downsizing and everything else. So it must have been a traumatic thing. One thing that struck me is the rapport that you guys had with the growers, and I spent a lot of hours riding with Bob Klingbill, and I know that the same thing happened with you. But tell me a little bit about how y'all interacted with the growers and what it was like, because you were their link, and they talked to you, and it must have been a rewarding experience to be able to help these growers out, whether it was freezes, whether it was dry weather, whatever else it was.
Well, we had a good rapport with a lot of them, that's true. And I mean, some of them that are still alive are still good friends of mine. But the thing about this, starting way back, nobody had ever seen anything like this before. And they felt like when we cut these trees back, when they started coming out, that they were going to have groves again. So they were anxious to do this. And they didn't mind spending the money to get it done. Well, unfortunately, a year and a half later, we had another freeze, and they went to the taproot then.
Yeah, it was difficult. And I just remember a couple of stories about interacting with growers. Bob and I went over to DeLand one day, and what was the guy that his family was the Burgess Battery people?
Mr. Nielsen, he was the one that I mentioned. See, there were two of them, Dave Nielsen and Maurice Nielsen, and they married sisters.
Okay, so we went over to.
They both had an eye for business.
So Bob and I went over to Mr. Nielsen's in DeLand, and it was almost as if they'd been friends for all these years. So we get over there, and Mr. Nielsen says, "Bob says I got to show you something." So he goes out in the back room, and he comes out with this fly rod, and it was a $700 split bamboo fly rod. So he and Bob are out in the side yard doing some fly casts there, showing him the fly rod. And then Bob says, this young guy probably has never seen a match set of Parker shotguns. oh, Mr. Nielsen went upstairs and brought down and opened up, and he had all these beautiful shotguns that he had. But to me, it was like brothers that were talking, and I know you did the same thing. You were in everybody's home and visited with them and everything else. I see Dr. Swanson, you know, he still talks about the time when, you know, you helped these people out. And to me, that's what the co-op was, and the interaction that you had, even though these were all small growers, it was like it was one big family.
Well, they needed help, and we tried our best to do what we could for them.
He's in it. So Richard went out and put a plug in all the manifolds, and he said, what are we doing, Mr. Harrison? And Bubba said, we're going to spray like Mr. Bob sprayed. And Mr. Bob put out 750 gallons to the acre, and we weren't going to put out 500. And Richard said that was the doomsday for him, because he had no break, because he only had one water truck driver to the sprayer. He said, I worked my fanny off all summer trying to keep up with Bubba, putting out 750 gallons of spray to the acre. And now kids put out 125, and they think they're hosing the trees down. So it's just amazing how things have changed.
Well, we weren't putting out that because we were wanting to put out sprayed up, because we had a lot of growers, they wanted it puddled under the tree.
Well, you had snow scale to worry about,
that's right.
breezy spot. We talked about them big problems. I know in comparison to greening, they aren't, but they were. It was an issue in trying to put out that kind of spray and keep up with everything. But you had to have had some really fantastic equipment operators.
Well, Bubba was good, because my daddy went to Georgia and brought him back when he was a boy. And I knew he'd work, and that's why I had Rick with him, because I wanted him to learn to work.
Okay. One last question issue I'd like to talk about. There for a while, we were highly dependent upon offshore labor to help us with, I guess, primarily picking, but did they do anything else besides picking? And tell us a little bit about the folks that came in and how they interacted, how y'all dealt with them, and what kind of quality folks came in as offshore labor.
They were some of the finest workers that we ever had, and I tell you, I would have put them up against anybody's crews. You know, the thing was, they came here to pick fruit. And usually if a man's a good fruit picker, he's a good worker. So what they did was they saved the best fruit pickers. And I don't know, we're just talking here, but Wilson Parrish, he kind of had the choice, because he ran the camp down there. They didn't get on his truck unless they could pick 125 boxes a day. He wouldn't even haul them out. So, I mean, you know, by having a lot of his workers and stuff, I had some really good crews. And back then, there wasn't any herbicide, and there weren't any hoe machines. So we were putting the fertilizer out by hand, so you were putting all that fertilizer around a little tree, and it grew grass like crazy. And then we had to go in and hoe it, because a lot of these groves that we'd planted were old pastures. I mean, they were either Pangola grass, or they were Bahia grass, or something like that. And that fertilizer brought it to life. But I had one crew, and we had 300 acres out there, that block there behind old White Rose Nursery. I'd put them in there, and they'd hoe that thing in 2 days. 300 acres of some of the worst grass that you've ever saw.
So you were having to keep up with all these young trees, planted in pasture, fertilized, all with hand hoeing.
That's all we had.
No herbicides.
We wore out a lot of files.
And when did we lose offshore labor? How long ago was that? I came in '68, so it must have been in the late '50s, early '60s when we got weaned away from that. Doesn't make too much difference, but anyway, it's an idea.
I don't remember the year, but we sure had some good help.
Okay. Now, you got other notes? What have I overlooked? What do we need to talk about?
I don't know. I think we pretty well covered most of it, unless you have some more questions there. I've been way back, because I thought maybe somebody might have a little bit of interest in what happened back then.
I do, let's hear some of those.
Okay. Well, I happen to be a fourth generation Lake County citrus grower. My great granddaddy planted groves after he came back from the Civil War. And I don't know some of the things that they did. I heard my daddy talk about some of them that he'd heard about, but I often wonder how they did as well as they did. But just like Louis Ziegler used to say, one of the most important things is location, location, location. I know you've heard that many a time. So theoretically, if you could, you wanted to find a good hilltop, you wanted to find it on the south or east side of a big lake, and you wanted a south or east slope. That was your ideal citrus land. And it was odd because way back, you know, right in through here was the citrus industry and north of us. They had 4 packing houses in Crescent City at one time. And I don't guess there's hardly anything up there anymore because I hadn't been up there for years, Jack, but to think that they had 4 packing houses there. And at Seville, Mr. McBride, he was the biggest shipper of tangerines in the state of Florida, right there out from Pearson. But there weren't any bulldozers, and you had to clear up the land. And I tell you, some of it was rough. Times were hard, things were cheap. If you hired somebody, you could hire them for $1.25 a day. And I mean, that was working. And if you contracted it to them, they'd contract grubbing a lot of this land. All they had was a shovel, an axe, a grubbing hoe, and a crosscut saw. And they'd contract grubbing a lot of this land for somewhere around $10 to $14 an acre, how rough it was. You say, my gosh, how could a man do that? Well, he was making better than wages if he contracted it for that price. My daddy used to say people will steal your tools if you leave them out, but he says, I've never seen anybody steal a grubbing hoe. Back then, we didn't have nurseries like Blanton and Kaufman and all of those. Most people with smaller groves, and that's what they were, they raised their own trees. They didn't bud them. I mean, I don't know whether they didn't know how or they just didn't know. But most of the trees were seedling trees. And back then, the land was plentiful. A lot of the old timers felt like, well, you know, the land had no value at all. If the timber was cut off of it, it was worthless. But back then, they planted trees usually either 25 by 30 or 30 by 30. And one of the big advantages was they were going to make big trees. Nobody knew what a hedging machine or anything was. You couldn't cut them. And on top of that, they stood to dry weather so much better by being spaced out. You probably get a kick out of this. Alice and Daddy gave us that little 15 acres up there that Nick's got now. And I was real proud of it. And I didn't have any irrigation in there, but I planted them close together. I took Daddy up there to show it because I was proud of my little grove. He says, son, my God, it looks like you fell down and spilled them. You ought to have bought some more land.
Now, were you around when they used mules? I don't wanna,
Yes, sirree.
I don't want to
I worked-
age you or anything.
My daddy worked for a fruit company. And I intended to bring y'all some pictures today that I went to the deal that they had over at DeLeon Springs with the Stroms. They had a pen there that held 40 mules to work their groves. And all of the stuff that they had was, you know, mule-drawn stuff, even sprayers. And people have been interested in seeing them, but I couldn't find it. I put stuff up so well I can't find it.
I know
but-
the feeling.
You probably get a kick out of this. We didn't have any irrigation. And if you had a grove, lots of times you'd have it close to the lake for, you know, protection for cold and stuff. Well, it'd take a team of mules and put some 55-gallon drums on a wagon and go down there and back it in the lake, and we'd set up a bucket brigade. somebody was fortunate enough to get the weight out in the lake, dip up a bucket and hand it to somebody else, and then he'd hand it to the man on the wagon, and then he'd pour it in the 55-gallon drum. And then a lot of people don't know what they are, but we'd take a croaker bag, that's an old feed bag, and lay it over the drum, and then we'd take little blocks of wood and put it on there. And that was to keep the water from sloshing out before you got back to the trees. Because every drop was needed when you got back to the water in the trees.
And I
A
guess
Kroger bag was a feed bag?
That was old fertilizer bag
Oh,
used.
fertilizer bag.
And irrigation went from that to perforated pipe that you drag around the grove.
Well, let me get you one ahead of that, John. They had old pipe that was galvanized, and it had some kind of little ridges in it, and you'd have to push them together. And then you'd take a big rubber mallet and pound them together so the water didn't come out. And you'd have to lay your line up, and then you'd get started irrigating. And then when you'd irrigate, you had to drag a piece of tin, like a piece of roofing, to keep it from washing, and jerk a joint of pipe off, and then turn the water one way or another to keep it from washing a hole, and put them on down. That was fun irrigation. There wasn't any time of resting. See, when we got sprinkler pipe, boy, we thought we had it made, because you could rest about 20 or 30 minutes after you got your line laid on it. But on that old spankum pipe,
There were no resting.
There wasn't any
No
resting.
resting time
I
at all.
remember Grandpa had one of those old mallets and slamming that stuff together. Of course, I was just a kid, but I got to play in the water.
you didn't get to slam, man.
No, I wasn't big enough to slam.
And I was a slammer.
Dixie Slammer.
Back then, when we went to bank trees, they all had to be banked by hand. And there was nothing to take care of termites or anything. So what we did when we banked them, we dug down and got the yellow dirt and piled on them. And then if we were real good, we didn't have high winds. But I've seen times I'd have almost all of those trees blanked, and the wind would come in and blow for 2 or 3 days, and we'd have to go bank tree after tree after tree again, which wasn't any fun, because it wasn't fun in the first place, and in the second place you was expecting it to maybe freeze any night. On fertilizing, it was all put out by buckets. Boss Gilbert, he used to run that bigger fertilizer crew for me, had 14 boys on it. And you talk about working, I mean those kids did work. They'd put out a trailer, which was 22 tons, to a trailer and a half a day, by hand, according to the size of the trees. Well, if they got in trees where they were putting 5 to 6 pounds, they usually do a trailer and a half. But on low poundage, they'd usually get a trailer a day. And then we had to come back and hoe them by hand. Has anybody got any questions?